I'm Imani Devon, 38 years old, and for the past year, I thought I was mourning my daddy. I was wrong. I was being robbed. This morning, my ex-husband Darius and his new wife, Brittany, rolled up to my doorstep. She wore a greedy-ass smirk and the expensive pearls I'd left behind when I walked away from our marriage. "We're here for our rightful share of your father's estate," Brittany announced, her voice dripping with that fake bougie entitlement. "You need to vacate the premises immediately." I just smiled as I watched my lawyer's Mercedes pull up smooth behind them. They thought they were ambushing me. They didn't realize they were walking straight into my father's final trap. Before I continue this story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours. The Saturday morning light was soft as it poured through the bay windows of my father's study. This historic West End home in Southwest Atlanta had been my sanctuary since Daddy passed. This house was the last tangible piece of him I had left, a quiet refuge filled with his presence, his wisdom, his protective energy. I was carefully cataloging his collection of first edition books, rare works by Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and Maya Angelou. The smell of old paper, polished mahogany, and his faint scent of cigars wrapped around me like a hug. I was running my fingers over a signed copy of The Bluest Eye, remembering how he'd read passages to me on Sunday afternoons, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly chime. It was sharp, aggressive, demanding. I walked down the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the polished banister that my ex-husband Darius had always envied with his shallow-ass, materialistic eyes. I wasn't expecting company. My grief had kept the world at a distance, and honestly, that's exactly how I needed it. I opened the heavy oak door, and the morning's peace shattered like dropped crystal. Darius stood there looking uncomfortable in a suit that was obviously too tight around his growing gut, avoiding my gaze like the coward he'd always been. But it wasn't him who spoke first. It was the woman clinging to his arm like a designer accessory. Brittany, his new wife, the woman who just 1 year ago had been married to his younger brother, Terrell. Her blonde weave and crisp white pantsuit were a stark, aggressive contrast to the warm, historic entryway. She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me with the audacity of someone who'd never been checked in her life, her stiletto heels clicking loudly on the heart pine floors like countdown timer to some imagined victory. Her eyes scanned the foyer, the curved staircase, the vintage chandelier, the African art my parents had collected over decades, assessing its value like she was on some twisted episode of House Hunters, Homewrecker Edition. "So this is what he left you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension and that fake suburban accent she'd adopted. She ran a French manicured fingernail over a bronze Yoruba statue my father had purchased in Nigeria, leaving a small smudge. "It's a bit dusty, but I suppose it'll do once we redecorate." "Brittany," I said, my voice dangerously calm, as I closed the door with a deliberate click. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" She turned, that greedy smirk spreading across her cosmetically enhanced face. "I'm the new Mrs. Devon, Imani, and we're here to collect what's rightfully ours, Darius's inheritance." "What inheritance?" I started to ask, but Brittany just laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like glass breaking on concrete. "Oh, Imani, always so slow on the uptake," she said, her voice mocking. She swept her arm out dramatically to indicate the entire house is the inheritance. Boo. Before I could even process her words, she physically shoved me. It wasn't a gentle nudge or an accidental brush. It was a deliberate, aggressive push with the heel of her hand against my shoulder that sent me stumbling backward. The disrespect was breathtaking. She marched right into my foyer, her head held high, like she was surveying property she'd already purchased. She ran her hand along the antique wallpaper, her expression twisted with distaste. "This wallpaper is tragic. It'll have to go," she announced, as if speaking to an interior designer. She peered into the formal living room, her eyes critically scanning the furniture my father and I had carefully selected together over years of estate sales and auctions. "And this furniture? So heavy and dark." We'll replace everything with something more modern, something light and bright. I stood by the open door, the morning breeze suddenly feeling ice cold, despite the Atlanta heat beginning to build. I watched her, this stranger, this woman who had helped destroy my marriage, walk through my home, planning its complete transformation as if my family's history meant absolutely nothing. Darius just stood there on the porch like a statue, shifting his weight nervously, still refusing to make eye contact with me, like the punk he'd always been when things got real. "Brittany," I said, my voice dropping to that low, dangerous register my mother used to call my "don't try me" tone. "What the hell are you talking about?" She finally turned back to me, her eyes glinting with pure, undiluted triumph. "I'm talking about my house, Imani. Your father promised it to Darius for all his hard work, for his decade of loyalty and dedication." She took a step closer, lowering her voice, but making sure it was sharp enough to cut deep. "He knew Darius deserved it, not you. You were just the quiet little bookworm hiding in the library while the real work was being done. Darius was the son he always wanted, the one who understood business, who understood money." My fingers curled into tight fists at my sides, my nails digging deep into my palms. The sting of her words was sharp, but the sheer audacity, the absolute disrespect, was sharper. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Right now." Brittany laughed again, that high-pitched, grating sound that made my teeth clench. "Oh, honey, you're the one who needs to leave. We're here for our rightful share. Your father promised this house to Darius. So pack up your dusty old books and your sad little memories and get out. We want to move in by the 1st of the month." She leaned in closer, her smile turning absolutely venomous, her breath smelling like expensive coffee and lies. "Do you understand me?" she said slowly, deliberately, emphasizing each word, like I was simple. She truly believed she had won. She thought I was just the quiet, bookish girl my father had raised in his protective shadow. She had no idea who my father really was, a strategic mastermind who'd built an empire from nothing. And she had absolutely no idea, no concept whatsoever, of who I had become. In the years since he'd passed, the air in the foyer grew thick with betrayal and barely contained violence. Brittany stood there, blocking the hallway that led to my father's study, her arms crossed, her face a mask of smug victory, like she'd already won some game I didn't even know we were playing. "He doesn't want to talk to you, Imani," she announced with fake authority. "You need to leave. This isn't your house anymore." I ignored her completely. My eyes were fixed on the man standing by the marble fireplace in the living room, examining a silver picture frame like he owned it, like he owned everything in this house. The man who had been my father's most trusted advisor, his closest confidant for over a decade, Darius. My voice was steady, much steadier than the sickening lurch I felt deep in my stomach. "What is she talking about?" Brittany stepped forward aggressively, inserting herself directly into my line of sight like a human roadblock. "I'm handling the estate now. Dad left me in charge because he knew you couldn't handle it emotionally." I didn't even glance at her dismissive ass. My focus remained laser-locked on the man in the expensive Italian suit, the man I'd once trusted with everything. "Darius," I repeated, my voice cutting through the tension. "You letting her speak for you now? What are you doing in my house?" He finally looked up from the picture frame, his eyes usually so warm when he looked at me. The eyes that had crinkled with genuine affection when he'd toasted me at our wedding reception were now cold, calculating, empty. He placed the frame back on the mantel with deliberate, theatrical slowness. He walked forward with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards, stopping just behind Brittany and placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. My stomach twisted violently. This was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just business or greed. This was personal, intimate, planned. "Imani," he said, his voice smooth, detached, completely devoid of any emotion or history. "Brittany's right. You really shouldn't be here anymore." "Shouldn't be here?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my desperate attempt at control. "This is my father's house, my house. His will was crystal clear. He left it to me. You are the executor, Darius. You read that will yourself. You know exactly what he wanted. Darius took a calculated step forward, moving past Brittany with the swagger of a man who thought he was untouchable. His expression was cold, clinical, reptilian. What your father wanted, he said, his voice dropping into a menacing purr, was for his debts to be paid. Brittany's absolutely right. Your father owed me. Big time. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. Owed you? For what? You were his friend, his confidant. He trusted you with everything, his business, his finances, his legacy. 10 years, Darius said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. 10 years I managed his finances while they spiraled. 10 years I cleaned up his messes and bad investments. 10 years I kept this family afloat while he made sentimental decisions that cost real money. He knew what my loyalty was worth, Imani. He knew. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a small, arrogant gesture that made my blood boil with rage. He wanted me to have this house. It was the only asset left that could even begin to cover what he owed me for my services. Don't make this difficult, Imani. You were always the smart one growing up. Be smart now. Walk away quietly. Darius's cold words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Be smart now. Walk away. I stared at his face, searching desperately for the man I had married. The man who had held my trembling hand at my father's funeral. His eyes, filled with tears, I now realized were completely fake. Manufactured for the performance. He wasn't just my father's advisor and business manager. He was my husband. Or he had been until just 6 months ago, when he'd blindsided me with divorce papers while I was still drowning in grief. A memory flashed sharp and sickening through my mind. It was just over a year ago. The scent of summer rain and expensive perfume mixing in humid Atlanta air. I was coming home early from a business trip to New York, planning to surprise him with his favorite takeout from Busy Bee Cafe. I remember walking into our Buckhead condo, calling his name. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I heard laughter, low, intimate, female. It definitely wasn't my laugh. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart already knowing what my mind refused to accept. He was there with her, with Brittany. The sheets I'd picked out, the bed we'd shared, the space I'd considered sacred. My stomach clenched violently as I remembered the shock that had paralyzed me in that doorway. It wasn't just the cheating, the betrayal of our marriage vows. It was who he was cheating with that made it so much worse. Brittany, the woman married to his own younger brother, Terrell. The scandal had absolutely shattered their family. Terrell was destroyed, publicly humiliated at family gatherings, church functions, everywhere. I was humiliated right along with him, whispered about at brunches and book clubs. And Darius? Darius hadn't even apologized or shown a shred of remorse. He had simply filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Like our 8-year marriage had been a bad investment, he needed to liquidate quickly. The memory gave me sudden cold strength. The numbness that had protected me for months receded completely, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage that felt like fire in my veins. I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings and hardwood floors. Brittany, who had been watching me with that smug, superior look, visibly faltered. Darius's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Walk away, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, laced with steel. Like you walked away from your marriage? Like you walked away from your brother? Brittany's face went pale beneath her makeup. Darius took a threatening step forward, his jaw clenched. This has nothing to do with that ancient history, he snapped. This is business, pure and simple, everything. I spat, my voice rising with righteous anger, has to do with this. You stand there hand in hand with the woman you destroyed your family for. You had an affair with your own sister-in-law, Darius. You divorced me just 6 months after my father's funeral, when I was still grieving, when I couldn't even breathe properly. I was grieving too, Darius said, his voice tight, defensive. Were you? I challenged, taking a step toward him. Or were you just clearing the decks? Getting rid of your inconvenient wife so you could move on to your next conquest without complications? And now, after all that destruction, after ruining the families and breaking your brother's heart, you have the audacity to come back here, into my father's house, and demand it as some kind of payment? Your father and I had an agreement, Darius insisted, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking around the edges. A business agreement. An agreement? I looked him dead in his lying eyes. Or an opportunity. You saw a grieving old man losing his sharpness and a grieving daughter barely functioning, and you pounced like the predator you are. You used his trust. You exploited my pain. You thought we were weak, vulnerable, easy marks. I turned my gaze to Brittany, who was trying unsuccessfully to blend into the expensive wallpaper. And you helped him every step of the way. You were right there, waiting like a vulture to pick up the scraps of the family you both helped destroy. Darius's face flushed dark with rage. You need to be very careful, Imani. Watch your mouth. No, I said, feeling the last bit of fear evaporate like morning dew. You do. You think this is just business? You think this is just about a house and some property? You have no idea what you've just started. No idea at all. Darius's face became a mask of barely controlled fury. You think you're clever, don't you? Bringing up ancient history, trying to make me feel guilty. It changes absolutely nothing. The house is mine. The law is on my side. I have the paperwork to prove it. Brittany, recovering some of her earlier composure, stepped forward again, her voice dripping with venom and false confidence. He does. We have the will, Imani. Your father's final will. He wanted Darius to have this property. You're just a bitter, divorced woman who can't stand to see him happy and successful. You're trespassing in what's legally ours. You have exactly 5 seconds to leave before I call the police. The law, I repeated slowly, tasting the irony of the word. I looked past them, past their angry, entitled faces, toward the grand oak front doors. And then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or a friendly smile. It was slow, cold, and full of something they had never seen in me before, the quiet confidence of someone who knows they hold all the winning cards. Darius stopped mid-rant, his arrogance faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion and something that might have been fear. What's so funny? He demanded. What are you looking at? My smile widened, sharp as a blade. The law is a funny thing, Darius, I said, my voice dangerously light and calm. It's all about having the right paperwork, the correct documentation. You mentioned you have a will? What a coincidence. I'm also waiting for my lawyer, and he's running just a little late. I glanced at my watch, a deliberate, casual gesture designed to unsettle them. Oh, wait, there he is right now. I nodded toward the circular driveway visible through the front windows. A sleek black Mercedes sedan purred to a stop right behind Darius's flashy lease Porsche, effectively blocking it in. The driver's door opened with precision, and a distinguished man in his late 60s stepped out with the calm authority of someone who'd never lost a case that mattered. Mr. Wellington Shaw, my father's private attorney. The man who had handled our family's most sensitive and important affairs for over 30 years. Mr. Shaw wasn't just any lawyer. He was a legend in Atlanta's black business community. The man my father called his consigliere, a brilliant strategist from an older, more serious generation of professionals. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has never had to rush in his entire life, who knows instinctively that wherever he is, things won't start until he arrives and gives permission. He retrieved a thick, worn leather briefcase from the back seat and began walking toward the house. His sharp gaze fixed directly on Darius with the intensity of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Darius's face went absolutely white, drained of all color. He knew exactly who Mr. Shaw was, and what his presence meant. Brittany looked confused, sensing the dramatic power shift in the air, but not understanding its source or significance. Who is that? She hissed at Darius, gripping his arm. Who is that man? Mr. Shaw reached the top step of the porch with unhurried dignity. He ignored Brittany completely, his eyes locked on Darius with laser focus. Hello, Darius. Miss Brittany. His voice was a gravelly baritone that commanded instant silence and respect. I trust you both received my invitation? I'm so glad you could make it on such short notice. He stepped past me through the open door, with a slight respectful nod in my direction, placing his heavy briefcase on the antique hall table with a deliberate motion. The click of the brass latches echoed through the foyer like a judge's gavel calling court to order. Mr. Shaw turned slowly to face them, his expression perfectly neutral, professionally blank. Shall we move into the study? I think we have a great deal to discuss about the will you're both so confident about. The grand living room felt like a courtroom where judgment was about to be delivered. Mr. Shaw stood by the large marble fireplace, his briefcase open on the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the seriousness of what was about to unfold. Darius and Brittany stood opposite him near the grand piano, their initial shock hardening into defiant anger tinged with desperation. I stood near the doorway, feeling like a ghost in my own home, watching this drama unfold with a strange sense of detachment. I don't know what game you think you're playing, Shaw, Darius finally said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was tight, arrogant, trying to reclaim some control. This is a private family matter. It has nothing to do with you. You're retired, old school, irrelevant to modern business. My retirement status is irrelevant, Darius, Mr. Shaw replied, his voice unnervingly calm. However, my relationship with Augustus Devon and my obligations to his estate are not. He tasked me with one final duty: to oversee the execution of his true will, his real intentions. Precisely because he feared this exact scenario. He feared you, Darius. He saw you coming from a mile away. Brittany let out a short, ugly laugh that sounded forced and nervous. His true will? You mean that dusty old document you filed at the courthouse? Augustus changed his mind in his final days. He realized who really stood by him at the end, not his ungrateful daughter who was always too busy with her career, but the man who managed his entire life and business. She strode confidently to an antique writing desk in the corner of the room. From the top drawer, she pulled out a thick, pristine white envelope and marched back with theatrical flair. She didn't just place it on the coffee table, she threw it down aggressively. The document skidded across the polished wood surface, stopping just short of where Mr. Shaw stood. This, she announced, her voice ringing with manufactured triumph, is the revised will, the final testament of Augustus Devon. He signed it the very night before he passed away in the hospital. Read it yourself if you don't believe us. That's impossible. I finally found my voice, stepping forward. He was heavily medicated that last night. He wasn't lucid or coherent. He couldn't have signed anything legal. Oh, he was perfectly lucid, Brittany snapped, her eyes flashing with false conviction. He was clear-headed for the first time in months, clear enough to finally realize his mistake in leaving everything to you, clear enough to know who truly deserved his gratitude and generosity. Go ahead, read it. We had it properly witnessed and notarized. It's completely ironclad and legal. She leaned forward, planting her hands firmly on the table, her voice dropping to a vicious, intimate whisper. It states very clearly that in light of his outstanding debts and Darius's years of loyal, dedicated service, Darius is to be granted 50% ownership of this house and property. She paused for dramatic effect, her smile turning cruel and vindictive. And as a personal gift for his companionship and friendship during the hardest times, he is to receive the entire art collection, every single piece. The words hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The art collection, my mother's carefully curated paintings, the African sculptures they'd collected together during their travels. The one part of this house that held the most emotional meaning for me. The pieces that connected me to both my parents. He would never, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He would never give away Mama's paintings. Never. He did, Darius said, speaking directly for the first time since Mr. Shaw had arrived. His voice was cold, final, dismissive. He knew I appreciated their true value, both monetary and cultural. This document is completely legal and binding. You can fight it if you want, Imani. Drag this through the courts for years. Waste your money on legal fees. But you will lose. This is our house now, and you need to accept that reality. Darius stepped forward, his expression shifting smoothly from cold confidence to one of deep, manufactured hurt and disappointment. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair, as if exhausted by my lack of understanding and gratitude. Imani, please, he said, his voice now soft, pleading, dripping with false sincerity. I didn't want it to be this way. I hoped you would see the truth, understand the reality of the situation. He walked closer to the fireplace, positioning himself near Mr. Shaw, but still not looking at the lawyer. His focus remained on me, his eyes trying to convey wounded betrayal. "You know how hard I worked for your father," he continued, his voice rising with manufactured passion. "You know the countless hours I put in when he got sick. Who was there at the hospital every single day? Who sat with him night after night while you were off building your career? Where were you, Imani? New York? Chicago? Building your consulting business while your father was dying?" The accusation was sharp, calculated, designed to make me feel crushing guilt. "Who was it?" he continued, his voice trembling with false emotion. "Who held his hand when he was terrified and confused? Who managed the investments when he was no longer lucid enough to tell a stock from a bond?" "It was me, Imani, always me. I was the one protecting this family's interests. I was the one protecting his legacy when everyone else had given up." He turned dramatically to Mr. Shaw, gesturing broadly. "You know what a complete mess the finances were. Tell her. It was a total disaster. I was the one who navigated the creditors, who restructured the debts, who saved this very house from being seized by the bank. I did that. While everyone else was grieving and falling apart, I was working, solving problems, keeping everything afloat." He paced back to Brittany's side, taking her hand in a show of united solidarity. "Your father knew exactly what I'd done, what I'd sacrificed. My own marriage to you, my relationship with my brother, my own peace of mind. I put absolutely everything on hold for him, for this family, for you." "He's right," Brittany chimed in, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. "Augustus told me himself during those long hospital nights. He said Darius was the only one he could truly count on when things got hard. He said he saw Darius as the son he never had, the son he'd always wanted. He wanted Darius to have this house and that art collection. He was genuinely afraid you would just sell everything without understanding its value, that you didn't appreciate what he'd built over a lifetime." Darius nodded emphatically, his eyes glistening with unshed crocodile tears that I now recognized as pure performance. "This wasn't about greed or money, Imani. It was about gratitude, his gratitude for my loyalty. He knew I loved this house like it was my own. He knew I understood and appreciated those paintings and their cultural significance. He wanted them to be with someone who truly understood their value, their history. He didn't want you to be burdened with it all during your grief." He let out a long, dramatic, suffering sigh. "I never asked for any of this. I only did what was right, what was necessary." And this, he tapped the fake will on the table with reverence. This was his way of saying thank you. "For you to deny that, to fight it, it's like spitting on his grave. It's disrespecting my sacrifice and everything I did for him." His performance was absolutely sickening. The way his voice cracked with manufactured emotion, the pained look in his eyes as he spoke of sacrifice, the theatrical gestures, it was all so calculated, so rehearsed. And the most agonizing part, the part that twisted in my gut like a serrated knife, was that I had believed every word of this performance once. I had trusted this man completely. My mind slipped back to years, to the antiseptic smell of the ICU and wilting flowers, the constant, quiet beeping of monitors tracking my father's failing heart. Daddy Augustus lying in that hospital bed, looking impossibly small and frail. Tubes and wires connecting him to machines that were keeping him alive. I recalled sitting by his bedside, my mind completely numb, trying to field aggressive calls from creditors while simultaneously trying to understand what the doctors were explaining about his prognosis. I was drowning in responsibilities and grief, and then Darius had stepped in like a savior. He had appeared in the sterile hospital waiting room, his suit immaculate and pressed, his face a perfect mask of concern and genuine capability. "Imani," he had said, his voice so gentle, so full of strength and reassurance. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me handle all the business complications. You just focus on your father, on being here with him. It's what he would want. It's what I want. I will take care of absolutely everything." I remembered the wave of relief that had washed over me. It was so profound I had almost wept with gratitude. I had trusted him completely and without question. I had handed him everything: the passwords to all the business accounts, the keys to the office, temporary power of attorney to manage the estate's immediate financial needs and keep the aggressive creditors at bay. He had been so dedicated, so seemingly selfless. He was at the hospital every single day without fail, bringing me coffee exactly how I liked it, updating me in hushed, respectful tones about which creditors he'd successfully negotiated with and which assets he'd managed to protect from seizure. He would sit by Augustus's bedside for hours, reading him articles from the Wall Street Journal and Black Enterprise long after my father had slipped into unresponsiveness and couldn't hear or understand anything. He looked for all the world like the devoted son-in-law, the loyal friend, the man who genuinely cared. Darius, you are a lifesaver, I had whispered to him in the hospital hallway one night, my voice raw and broken from crying. I don't know what we would have done without you here. Daddy is so lucky to have you in his life. He had pulled me into a tight hug that I now realized was completely hollow and empty. We're family, Imani, he had whispered back with perfect conviction. I'm just taking care of our family the way family should. The memory shattered like glass, and I was suddenly back in the living room. The hypocrisy of his words, taking care of our family, burned like acid in my throat, bitter and corrosive. He wasn't taking care of our family. He was positioning himself. He was setting up his next move with his new family with Brittany. He was still looking at me intently, waiting for his performance to work its magic, waiting for that old familiar gratitude and trust to soften my resolve. He mistook my silence for weakness and doubt. You see it now, don't you, Imani? He pressed, taking a step closer, his voice dropping to an intimate tone. He knew what I'd done. He wanted to reward my loyalty and dedication. My eyes, dry and burning with suppressed rage, met his directly. The gratitude I had once felt was completely gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity that cut through all his lies. You were dedicated, Darius, I said, my voice low and steady as steel. You were there every single day, without fail. You handled absolutely everything. A flicker of triumph crossed his face briefly. He thought he'd won, thought he'd convinced me. You were so dedicated, I continued, my voice hardening, that while you were supposedly saving my father's assets, you were also sleeping with your brother's wife in our bed. While you were managing his finances and protecting his legacy, you were looking for loopholes and opportunities. While you were holding my hand in that hospital hallway, you were planning this exact moment, this theft. I stepped toward him, closing the distance between us, refusing to let him hide. You weren't grieving, Darius. You were auditioning. You were performing for an audience of one, my dying father, hoping he was too medicated and confused to see through your act. My accusation hung in the air, sharp and heavy as a guillotine blade. You weren't grieving, Darius. You were auditioning for the role of devoted son. Darius's face hardened instantly. The mask of the wounded victim fell away completely, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. You're hysterical, Imani, he said dismissively. You're lashing out emotionally because you know you've lost. This document is legal and binding. He turned to Mr. Shaw with a dismissive wave of his hand. You're retired, Shaw. You're a relic from a different era. You have no standing here, no authority. This is the new will, the final will. It's ironclad. Mr. Shaw, who had been observing the entire scene with a quiet, almost bored expression, finally moved with deliberate purpose. He walked slowly toward the coffee table where the forged document lay. He didn't immediately reach for his own briefcase or pull out competing paperwork. Instead, he picked up the single sheet of paper that Brittany had thrown down with such dramatic triumph earlier. This is it? He asked, his voice deceptively mild, almost curious. This single page is your ironclad legal document? It's been properly witnessed and notarized, Brittany snapped, her voice high and increasingly nervous. It has his signature clear as day. It's completely legal. Mr. Shaw held the document up to the light streaming through the windows, examining it carefully. He didn't pull out a magnifying glass or call for expert analysis. He simply glanced at it with the trained eye of someone who'd spent 50 years examining legal documents and spotting forgeries, and then he smiled. It was a small, dry smile, more of a grimace of pure contempt than genuine humor. He actually laughed, a short, quiet, utterly dismissive sound that filled the room. "A poor copy," he said simply, placing the paper back on the table as if it were a soiled tissue. "A very poor amateur copy." Darius's face flushed deep red with anger and embarrassment. "What did you just say?" "That is a legal document with proper witnesses." "No, mister," Shaw said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "It's a forgery. And frankly, it's a terrible one. The signature alone gives it away immediately to anyone with experience." He picked up the document again, pointing to the signature line with one elegant finger. Augustus's signature was distinctive. The loop on the capital D in Devon, he always closed it completely, a tight, controlled loop. This one, he traced the forgery, is open, sloppy, uncertain. This wasn't written by a man who'd signed his name thousands of times over decades. He looked directly at Darius, his eyes filled with sharp, cutting disdain. "You're supposed to be good with details, Darius. You're a financial manager. You work with paperwork and signatures every single day. You, of all people, should have done much better than this amateurish attempt." "You can't prove that," Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "We had witnesses. Multiple witnesses." "I'm sure you did, mister," Shaw replied, his tone bored and dismissive. "Probably friends of yours, people you paid or coerced. But it doesn't matter. This piece of paper," he tapped it with one finger, "is completely worthless. It's a theatrical prop, and a poorly made one at that." He turned and walked back to his own briefcase, which he'd placed carefully on the antique desk. "This document isn't the real problem here. It's just a symptom, evidence of desperation." He clicked open the brass latches on his case with deliberate slowness. "The real problem, Darius, is the one you created 10 years ago. And that problem, I'm afraid, has much better paperwork, much more solid legal foundation." Darius and Brittany stared at him, momentarily stunned, into complete silence. The shift in power was so sudden, so absolute and devastating, it left them scrambling mentally. 10 years ago? Darius stammered, his mind visibly racing, trying desperately to find his footing. "What are you talking about? That's ancient history. It has absolutely no bearing on this situation." Brittany, recovering faster from the shock, pointed a shaking finger at the lawyer. "You're bluffing. You're just a senile old man trying to scare us with legal threats. That document," she jabbed at her fake will, "is what matters. This house is legally ours." I finally stepped forward from my position near the doorway. All the fear, all the paralyzing grief that had controlled me for a year had been completely burned away, leaving only cold, hard resolve. "Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through her panicked defense, "you really don't understand what's happening here, do you?" She spun toward me, her face contorted with rage and fear. "Don't you dare talk down to me. You've lost. It's over. Accept it." "No," I said calmly, "I mean, you really fundamentally don't understand the situation you've walked into." I walked slowly toward the coffee table, picked up the pathetic forgery, and tore it neatly in half. The sound was satisfying, final. Brittany gasped audibly, but didn't move to stop me. "You're fighting over the wrong thing entirely," I said, letting the pieces fall to the expensive carpet. "You went to all the trouble of faking a will, of creating this elaborate story of debt and gratitude, all to get something very specific." I paused, letting the moment hang heavy in the air. "But my father didn't own this house when he died." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening, suffocating. "What?" Darius barked the word reflexively. "What did you just say? Don't be ridiculous." "Of course he owned it. I managed his assets personally. I saw the deed myself." "You saw the original deed?" "Mister," Shaw interjected smoothly, pulling a thick, professionally bound document from his briefcase. "You didn't see this. The Imani Devon Trust, established exactly 10 years ago, the day after your wedding to Imani. In fact," he said, looking at me with sad, knowing kindness, before turning back to Darius. Augustus did this specifically because of your wedding. Augustus, Mr. Shaw continued in his measured, authoritative voice, was a sentimental man who loved his daughter deeply. But he was absolutely not a fool. He knew his daughter had just married a man who was, let's say diplomatically, ambitious and hungry for status and wealth. He opened the thick-bound document on the desk, the expensive pages turning with a soft, authoritative whisper. He created an irrevocable trust immediately. This house, the surrounding grounds and property, and everything inside it, including the entire art collection you're both salivating over, was transferred completely into that trust. Its sole beneficiary upon his death is his daughter, Imani Devon. I watched Darius's face as the color visibly drained from it like water from a broken glass. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was terrified. He wasn't just a forger caught in a lie. He was a complete fool who'd been played. He couldn't have, Darius whispered, his mind clearly sifting frantically through every file he'd ever accessed, every conversation he'd had with my father. He would have told me. I was his financial manager. He trusted me. Why would he tell you, Darius? I asked, my voice sharp. He didn't trust you at all. He just used you, let you think you were in control. But the real assets, the ones that truly mattered, were put away safe from your reach exactly 10 years ago. This house hasn't been his property to give away for an entire decade, Mr. Shaw added. Your forgery, even if it were perfect and professionally done, is completely worthless. You're trying to claim ownership of something the deceased didn't even own. That's not just fraud, it's stupidity. That's a lie, Marcus roared, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged forward, reaching for the document Mr. Shaw was holding, but the old lawyer simply held it calmly out of his reach. You're lying, Darius repeated, his voice breaking. I was his financial manager for a decade. A transfer of this magnitude I would have known. It would have crossed my desk, required my signature. No, Darius, Mr. Shaw said, his voice now laced with unmistakable pity. It wouldn't have. Because Augustus was meticulous and strategic. He used a completely different firm, my firm, precisely so you wouldn't know. So you couldn't interfere or sabotage. Mr. Shaw opened the bound document on the desk, the heavy pages turning with a soft, expensive whisper that seemed to echo through the silent room. Let me educate you, Darius, since you seem to have missed this crucial detail in your thorough review of the family's assets. He pointed to the first page with his elegant finger. 10 years ago, as I stated, immediately following your marriage to Imani, Augustus created the Imani Devon Trust. It is an irrevocable family trust. I'm sure even you know what irrevocable means, Darius. It means it cannot be changed, cannot be altered, cannot be undone, not by Augustus, not by you, not by anyone, not even by a court order. Brittany looked completely lost, her perfectly made-up face showing genuine confusion for the first time. What does that even mean? He's just some old man with old papers, Miss Brittany. Mr. Shaw cut her off sharply, his eyes still fixed on Darius with laser intensity. It means that 10 years ago, Augustus legally and permanently transferred ownership of this property, the house, the surrounding land, and yes, he added, with a slight, cruel twist of a smile, the entire art collection your heart desires into this trust. The sole beneficiary upon his death is his daughter, Imani. He let the words sink in, the silence in the room growing heavier, more suffocating with each passing second. This house, Mr. Shaw continued relentlessly, has not legally belonged to Augustus for an entire decade. It was not his to leave in any will. It was not part of his personal estate. It exists as a separate legal entity. It has belonged to Imani and Trust this entire time, just waiting for Augustus's passing to transfer completely. He closed the thick document with a final, definitive thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. So no, Darius, your so-called sacrifice is not being rewarded. Your decade of loyalty was seen for exactly what it was: predatory calculation and opportunistic theft. Augustus saw through you 10 years ago. He protected his daughter from you before you even began your scheme. And now you have absolutely nothing. Brittany's perfectly applied red lipstick was a stark, bright contrast against the sudden chalky white of her face. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. She stumbled backward, her hand gripping the edge of the grand piano as if to physically hold herself upright. The reality of their situation was finally penetrating her gold-digging brain. Darius, however, exploded with violent rage. "Impossible," he roared, the word tearing from his throat like a wounded animal. He shot to his feet, kicking the small antique coffee table violently. The torn pieces of his forged wool fluttered to the expensive carpet like dead, worthless leaves. "This is absolutely absurd," he shouted, pacing like a caged predator. "You're lying. It's a trick, some kind of legal manipulation." He jabbed a finger, not at Mr. Shaw, but directly at me, his face contorted with rage and desperation. You did this. You poisoned him against me. You whispered lies in his ear while he was sick and vulnerable." "I did nothing," I said, my voice dangerously calm, steady as granite. "I was grieving, barely functioning. You were the one managing his affairs, remember? You were the one who was so thorough, who claimed to see everything, who had access to all his files. He promised me." Darius yelled, his voice cracking, revealing the raw, desperate greed beneath the expensive tailored suit. He began pacing frantically, his hands clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. "He told me," Darius continued, his voice rising to a near scream. "He sat right in this very room, right where you're standing, and he told me personally. He said, 'Darius, you are the son I never had. You deserve this house and everything in it.' He promised me." He whirled on Mr. Shaw, his eyes wild with desperation and dawning realization. "You don't know the conversations we had in private. You weren't there during those long nights. He promised me this house as my payment. He said it was my rightful portion for everything I'd done. He said I had earned it through my dedication." Mr. Shaw watched him calmly, unmoved, his expression one of mild distaste mixed with professional detachment. "Augustus was a kind man, Darius. He was also a very lonely man after his wife passed away. I'm absolutely sure he said many comforting things in his grief, made promises that felt real in the moment. But what he actually did," he tapped the thick-bound trust document firmly on the desk, "was legally protect his daughter from predators like you." "No." Brittany finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched, desperate shriek that sounded completely out of place in the elegant room. "It can't be. That art collection, it's worth millions. Multiple millions. He wouldn't just give it all away to her. He wouldn't." "He didn't give it away, Miss Brittany," Mr. Shaw corrected, his tone icy and precise. "He gave it to his daughter, which is, you'll find, exactly what most loving fathers do. They protect their children and ensure their inheritance. This is theft." Darius yelled, his composure completely shattered, his careful facade in ruins. "She has stolen everything from me. This was my payment, my compensation for a decade of my life dedicated to this family. I worked for this. I earned every single piece of it." He was completely unraveling before our eyes. The cool, collected financial advisor was gone, replaced by a raving, cornered animal. He saw his entire payday, the one he had built his treacherous life around, the one he had betrayed his brother and destroyed his marriage for, vanishing into thin air like smoke. It had all been for absolutely nothing. "You won't get away with this," he snarled at me, his face twisted with hatred. "I'll fight this trust in court. I'll prove." "Prove what, Darius?" I asked, stepping forward confidently for the first time, feeling my power returning. "Prove that you were sleeping with your sister-in-law while managing my father's affairs? Prove that you forged a will? Prove that you're a sloppy con artist who didn't even do basic research before attempting theft?" His face contorted with pure rage, and for a terrifying second I thought he might actually strike me physically. But Mr. Shaw stepped quietly, firmly between us, his presence a wall of legal authority and protective power, and Mr. Shaw wasn't finished. Not even close. Mr. Shaw stood between us like an immovable barrier, calm and collected in the face of Darius's explosive rage. You will prove nothing, Darius, Mr. Shaw said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. Except your own guilt and stupidity. Guilt? Darius spat, his face inches from the older man's, trying to intimidate through proximity. I am guilty of nothing except being smarter than him, smarter than her, smarter than all of you. No, Darius, Mr. Shaw said, his voice dangerously quiet now, almost a whisper. You are guilty of a felony. Several felonies, in fact, all meticulously documented. He turned back to his briefcase on the desk, his movements slow, almost theatrical in their deliberation. He didn't pull out another trust document or a letter. He pulled out a massive spiral-bound report, over an inch thick, with a glossy professional cover. On its pristine white surface was the unmistakable deep blue corporate logo of Deloitte, one of the largest, most respected forensic accounting firms in the entire world. He dropped the report onto the desk with a heavy, final thud that echoed through the silence like a death knell. What is that? Brittany whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling. This Miss Brittany, Mr. Shaw said, with cold satisfaction, is the final audit, the comprehensive forensic investigation that Augustus commissioned himself 6 months before he passed away. The one he asked me to keep absolutely safe until the perfect moment arrived. He looked directly at Darius, his eyes like chips of ice. You were right about one thing, Darius. You were there every single day without fail. You did have complete access to everything. You were so busy siphoning off accounts, creating shell corporations, and rerouting funds to your personal accounts, that you never noticed the other set of books, the real ones, the accurate ones. He tapped the cover of the thick report. This is a complete, detailed, and utterly damning forensic audit of every single transaction you made over the last 10 years. Every dollar you stole, every fraudulent management fee you paid to yourself, every suspicious investment that was actually a transfer to your personal offshore accounts. It's all documented here in excruciating detail. Witness statements, bank records, wire transfer receipts, IP addresses, everything. He leaned in closer to Darius, his voice dropping. Augustus didn't just protect his house, Darius. He built your cage, brick by brick, and then he waited patiently for you to walk into it. Darius stared at the thick bound report on the desk as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. The Deloitte logo seemed to pulse in his vision, growing larger. He was no longer just a failed con artist caught in a lie. He was a documented, provable criminal, facing serious prison time and an audit. He stammered, the word catching painfully in his throat. That's just standard procedure for estates. It means nothing without context. Oh, this was far from standard procedure, Darius, Mr. Shaw said, his voice laced with cold, professional satisfaction. He rested one hand possessively on the damning report. Augustus was a careful, strategic man. He was sentimental about his family, yes, but he was also a brilliant businessman who built a multi-million-dollar empire from absolutely nothing. He knew character, he studied people, and he knew your character intimately, Mr. Shaw paused deliberately, letting the words sink in deep. He knew his son-in-law was a talented financial manager with good credentials. He knew you were ambitious and hungry for success. And he knew you were sleeping with your brother's wife long before Imani discovered it. He saw you clearly, Darius. He saw through your performance. So 2 years ago, Mr. Shaw continued, right when his health began to seriously decline, he made a decision. He hired an independent forensic accounting firm, the best in the business. He wanted them to take a very close, detailed look at your decade of devoted service and loyalty. Brittany looked like she was going to be physically sick, her hand pressed against her stomach. Darius was frozen in place, his face ashen, covered in cold sweat. The auditors were given complete access to everything, Mr. Shaw continued, his voice a relentless, steady drumbeat of doom. The real books, the ones you didn't know existed, the backup files, the shadow accounts. And they found, well, they found exactly what Augustus expected them to find. Exactly what he suspected. He opened the audit to the executive summary, a dense page filled with figures, charts, and absolutely damning conclusions written in cold, professional language. They found, he said, reading slowly and deliberately for maximum impact, that during the last 3 years of Augustus's life, while you were supposedly managing his affairs and protecting his interests, you, Imani Devon, systematically embezzled just over $1.8 million from his personal and business accounts. I gasped audibly, my hand flying to my mouth. Even I hadn't known the true scale of his betrayal, the depth of his theft. He did it quite skillfully, I'll admit, Mr. Shaw went on, his tone almost admiring in its contempt. A sophisticated network of shell corporations, dozens of small, individually untraceable wire transfers, inflated consulting fees paid to companies that, upon thorough investigation, were owned by. He paused dramatically, looking directly at Brittany. Oh look, Miss. Brittany's name appears frequently. Brittany let out a small, strangled, animal sound of pure terror. And of course, Mr. Shaw continued relentlessly, the classic move, a series of large lump sum transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, funds that were specifically meant to pay estate taxes, funds designated for hospital bills, funds meant for the upkeep and maintenance of this very house. He looked up from the report, his eyes locking on Darius with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. You weren't just stealing from his business accounts, Darius. You were stealing from his life, from his daughter's inheritance. You were systematically draining him dry while pretending to be his savior, his loyal protector, Mr. Shaw flipped to the final summary page of the devastating audit. He didn't look at Darius immediately. He looked at me first, as if to prepare me mentally for the final ugly truth, the complete scope of the betrayal. The auditors, he said, his voice, precise and completely devoid of emotion, were able to trace, document, and verify fraudulent transfers, fabricated invoices, and direct embezzlement totaling. He paused, then finally turned his penetrating gaze directly on Darius, who looked like he might collapse. 1800 stolen directly from Augustus's business and personal accounts over the last 36 months of his life. The number seemed to physically suck all the oxygen from the room. Brittany, who had been muttering desperately about legal challenges and technicalities, simply stopped mid-sentence. Her perfectly painted mouth fell open in shock, her eyes wide with raw primal terror. This was no longer about losing a house or an art collection. This was about prison, real prison time. But Darius's reaction was the most devastating to witness. All the fight, all the rage, all the arrogant denial that had sustained him simply vanished. It didn't just drain away slowly, it was violently ripped from him as if by a physical force. His knees literally buckled beneath him. He stumbled backward, his legs completely giving out, and collapsed heavily into the antique leather armchair behind him. He didn't just sit down, he fell into it like a puppet with cut strings. His face, which had been flushed red with rage just moments before, was now a sickly, waxy white. A thin sheen of cold sweat instantly beaded on his forehead and upper lip. He stared blankly at the thick audit report on the desk, his breathing shallow and rapid, his eyes completely unfocused. He looked exactly like a man who had just been told he had minutes to live. He was, in every sense of the word, a completely broken man. I stared at the report, then at Darius. The man I had married, the man who had pretended to grieve with me, the man who had managed my father's entire life. He had been systematically robbing us blind the entire time. What? The word came out as a choked whisper from my throat. My mind couldn't fully process the magnitude of the number. $1.8 million. It seemed impossible, surreal. I looked at Mr. Shaw, my own voice trembling with shock and dawning horror. needing to hear the words spoken plainly, clearly, so I could truly understand. He stole from him? He stole from my father while he was dying? Mr. Shaw nodded once, his weathered face grave, his eyes full of a grim, sad finality. Yes, Imani, he didn't just betray your trust and your marriage vows. He methodically, systematically robbed your father while he was at his most vulnerable, while he was dying in a hospital bed. Unable to defend himself, I looked at Darius, really looked at him slumped in that chair like a discarded suit, a pathetic, sweating wreck of a man. The person I had loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had never actually existed. He was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion, a performance. This creature, this hollow shell of pure greed sitting before me, was the reality. And I felt a wave of such profound, visceral disgust roll through me that I physically took a step back. It was overwhelming, nauseating, like the smell of something dead and rotting. 8 million stolen. The number echoed endlessly in my head, and suddenly small, confusing moments from the past 2 years snapped into sharp, sickening focus, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. I remembered a conversation from just last year, maybe 8 months ago. Darius, sitting with me at the kitchen table in our condo, his brow furrowed with theatrical concern, his face a perfect mask of worry. He had a laptop open, showing me columns of numbers highlighted in red: losses, debts, failures. Augustus made some questionable investments before he got really sick. Imani, he had said, his voice a perfect imitation of regret and sympathy. This tech stock, it's completely bottomed out, worthless now. We've taken a significant loss, a really bad hit. I'm doing my absolute best to stop the bleeding, but we're going to have to be very careful with spending for a while. I remembered his hand covering mine, warm and seemingly comforting. We're going to have to really tighten our spending, cut back on everything non-essential, he'd said with fake sincerity, just until I can rebalance the portfolio and recover some of these losses. Tighten our spending. The phrase now tasted like poison in my memory. He had actually convinced me to sell my mother's diamond earrings, the ones she'd worn on her wedding day, the ones I'd planned to pass down to my own daughter someday. He said we desperately needed the liquidity to cover mounting hospital expenses that insurance wasn't fully covering. I had cried as I handed him that small velvet box, and he had held me tenderly, telling me I was so strong, telling me it was exactly what my father would have wanted, that Daddy would be proud of my sacrifice. He wasn't covering legitimate expenses. He was the expense. He was the massive drain. He was the reason the numbers were bleeding red. Every dollar I thought was going to save my father was actually going into Darius's pocket. You made me sell my mother's jewelry, I whispered. The words quiet, but cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. Her wedding earrings. Darius's head snapped up from where he'd been staring blankly at the floor, his eyes dull, terrified, caught. What? Imani, you told me we had to tighten our spending, I said, my voice growing stronger, colder, more controlled with each word. You told me Dad's investments were failing catastrophically. You showed me detailed spreadsheets, Darius spreadsheets you must have completely fabricated, manufactured lies. I walked closer, unable to stop myself, fueled by pure, cold rage that felt like ice in my veins. Every single time you said we're taking a loss, it actually meant you were taking a win, pocketing money. Every time you said we had to be careful, it meant you were being reckless and greedy with my inheritance, my father's life savings. I stopped just a few feet from him, looking down at the man who had completely collapsed in on himself. You weren't just stealing from a vulnerable, dying man. You were stealing from his grieving daughter at the same time. You were looking me directly in the eye, comforting me, holding me while I cried, all while you were systematically picking my pocket, robbing me blind. My voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You are pathetic. You're not a brilliant financial manager or a clever con artist. You're just a common parasite, a bottom-feeding thief who finally got caught. Darius shook his head weakly, a pathetic, jerky movement. No, That's a complete misunderstanding," he stammered desperately. "It's just bookkeeping errors, accounting mistakes. Augustus." He was so confused at the end, so mentally unclear. He didn't. He tried to stand up, to pull himself together, but his trembling legs wouldn't obey his commands. He looked up at me desperately, his eyes pleading, searching frantically for any trace of the gullible, trusting woman he had married and manipulated for years. "Imani, please. This is just a terrible mistake. A misunderstanding," he begged, his voice breaking. "We can fix this. We can work this out between us." "It is not a mistake, Darius, Mr. Shaw said, his voice quiet, but carrying the absolute weight of an executioner pronouncing final judgment. "It is a comprehensive forensic audit conducted by one of the most respected firms in the world. It is complete, detailed, and absolutely final." Darius was visibly shaking now, his hands trembling. But why?" he stammered, his mind clearly unable to process the timeline, the careful planning. If he knew 2 years ago, if he had proof, why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he confront me, fire me, call the police? Why wait? Why now? Mr. Shaw turned away from Darius's pathetic, crumbling form. He looked directly at me instead, and for the first time since this confrontation began, his hard, professional demeanor softened noticeably. He wasn't just speaking to Darius anymore. He was speaking to me, delivering my father's final message, his last act of protection. "Because of her, Mr. Shaw said gently, nodding in my direction with something like fatherly affection. "Because of you, Imani. Everything he did was to protect you." I looked at him, confused, my eyes filling with tears. "Me? But I don't understand." "Augustus knew everything, Mr. Shaw said, his voice heavy with the burden of the secret he had faithfully carried for 2 years. "He had the first preliminary draft of this damning report over a year before he passed away. He knew about the systematic theft. He knew about the shell corporations and offshore accounts. He even knew about Miss Brittany and your affair, Darius." Brittany, who was still pressed against the far wall, like she wanted to melt into it, let out a small, terrified whimper. "He wanted to fire you immediately, Mr. Shaw continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He wanted to call the police, the FBI, the district attorney. He wanted to completely ruin you, destroy you publicly. But he didn't. He made a conscious choice to wait, to hold back." "Why?" I whispered, the word catching painfully in my throat. Why would he protect Darius after everything he'd done? "He wasn't protecting Darius, Mr. Shaw said firmly. "He was protecting you, his daughter, his only child. He didn't want to destroy you with a massive criminal scandal while you were already drowning in grief over his impending death." Mr. Shaw's words hit me like a physical force. He was dying, Imani. He knew his time was very short, measured in months, not years. He looked at you, his beloved only child. And he knew this news, the knowledge that the man you had married, the man you trusted completely, was not just an adulterer, but a common thief who'd stolen millions. He knew that devastating news would absolutely break you. He knew you couldn't emotionally handle both losses at once, losing him and losing your faith in Darius simultaneously. Tears were now streaming freely down my face. My father, even in his final days, even knowing he'd been betrayed and robbed, had thought of me first. So he kept quiet, Mr. Shaw said, his voice gentle. He protected you from the truth. He swallowed his justified rage, suppressed his desire for immediate justice. And he let Darius continue to play his pathetic little game, all while this audit was quietly, methodically compiling evidence in the background. He paused, letting the full weight of my father's sacrifice sink in. He let Darius believe he was getting away with everything because it was the only way to spare you additional pain during the worst period of your life. Mr. Shaw picked up the thick audit again, holding it up. He gave me this comprehensive report, and he gave me one absolutely final, crystal clear instruction. Do not use this evidence unless Darius comes for the house after I'm gone. Protect Imani first, always. But if he has the audacity to come after her home, after everything he's already stolen, then you burn him to the ground. You destroy him completely, mister. Shaw looked at Darius with eyes full of cold contempt. And today, Darius, you came for the house. You showed up with your forged will and your new wife, full of arrogance and entitlement. You forced Imani's hand. You forced your own reckoning. He placed the audit back on the desk with finality. This is the legacy Augustus left specifically for you, Darius. The trap he carefully set, built from a father's protective love, and sprung by your own insatiable greed. Darius's strangled question hung in the air like smoke. But why, if he knew everything, why let me stay? Why keep me around? Mister, Shaw actually sighed, a sound of deep weariness. He walked slowly to the large window, looking out at the gardens my father had lovingly maintained for decades. For a long moment, he seemed to be speaking to the trees and flowers rather than to us, because, Darius, mister, Shaw finally said, his voice heavy with complicated emotion. Augustus was a deeply complicated man. He was furious, absolutely enraged by your betrayal, but he was also thoughtful and considerate of others. He was trying to protect your family, the entire Devon family. Darius just stared at his back, unable to fully comprehend. Your family? Darius repeated weakly. Yes, mister, Shaw said, turning around slowly. Your brother Terrell, the good man whose wife you stole without remorse. Your elderly parents who attend church every Sunday and are respected in the community. Augustus knew that if he had exposed you while he was still alive, if he had you arrested for embezzlement right then, the scandal would have absolutely destroyed your entire family. He walked back toward us. It wouldn't have just been your name in the newspapers and on the evening news. It would have been theirs, your parents, your brother who was already devastated by your betrayal with Brittany. Augustus knew Imani was already suffering tremendously. He absolutely refused to inflict that kind of public humiliation and shame on Terrell too. He refused to add another innocent victim to your growing pile. Brittany looked confused, but Darius's face had gone rigid. He was beginning to see the full picture, the complete trap. So he set a trap instead, mister. Shaw continued, his voice becoming colder, more surgical. A patient, meticulous trap. He saw your greed, Darius, and he made a calculated decision to use it against you. He fed it. He encouraged it. The pieces began clicking into place in my own mind. You said he promised you the house, I whispered, looking at Darius with new understanding. Mr. Shaw nodded gravely. Exactly. Augustus pretended to promise Darius everything. He knew your greed wasn't just for money, Darius. It was for status, for validation, for this house and everything it represented. He knew you wanted to be him, to have his life, his respect, his legacy. He knew that if he just died quietly without saying anything, you might have been satisfied with the $1.8 million you'd already stolen, mister. Shaw continued. You might have just disappeared, taken your ill-gotten gains and vanished. And Augustus could not let that happen. He could not let you win. I stared at Mr. Shaw, understanding dawning. So the promise of the house was bait. Yes, Mr. Shaw confirmed. He confided in you, Darius. He called you the son he never had. He promised you this house, knowing it was the one thing you coveted more than anything else, more than money. He knew that after he was gone, your arrogance would be your downfall. He knew you wouldn't just walk away quietly. You would have to come back. You would have to claim your grand prize. You would have to overplay your hand. Mr. Shaw's eyes were like ice. And in doing so, you would expose yourself completely. You would walk right into the final trap he had been carefully setting for 2 solid years. Darius was shaking his head in denial, a small, repetitive, pathetic motion. No, no, no. This can't be. Oh yes, mister, Shaw said coldly. He knew you'd be sloppy in your greed. He knew you'd forge a will rather than just walk away. He knew you'd show up here today full of righteous indignation to bully his grieving daughter. And he knew I would be waiting for you with this audit. He gestured to the damning report. He didn't just die and leave loose ends, Darius. He waited strategically. He waited for you to personally and publicly destroy yourself, to spring the trap with your own hands. The silence that followed Mr. Shaw's revelation was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of profound, suffocating silence that follows a verdict. The moment when a condemned man realizes there is no appeal, no escape, no second chance. Darius sat frozen in the leather armchair, his expensive suit, now wrinkled and damp with sweat. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. He stared at nothing, his eyes glassy and unfocused, his breathing shallow and rapid like a trapped animal's. Brittany had slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. Her designer dress pooled around her like a deflated parachute. Her perfect makeup was streaked with mascara tears, creating dark rivulets down her cheeks. She looked like a broken doll, discarded and forgotten. I stood there, my father's daughter, in my father's house, finally understanding the full depth of his love for me. Even in death, even from beyond the grave, he had protected me. He had seen everything, known everything, and still his first thought had been my well-being, my emotional survival. He loved you so much, Imani, Mr. Shaw said softly, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine emotion beneath. More than anything in this world. Everything he did, the trust, the audit, the waiting, the trap, it was all for you. To protect you first, and then to ensure justice was served when you were strong enough to witness it. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, tears flowing freely now. I thought he didn't care anymore toward the end. He seemed so distant, so closed off. I thought maybe I'd failed him somehow. No, Mr. Shaw said firmly, walking over to place a gentle hand on my shoulder. He was distant because he was carrying the weight of what he knew. He was protecting you from the truth while he was still alive because he knew it would destroy you. But he also knew that one day, when you were ready, when you had grieved him properly, you would need to know. You would need to see justice done. He squeezed my shoulder gently. He trusted you to be strong enough to handle this moment. And look at you, you are. You're standing tall in your home, exactly where you belong. Darius made a strangled sound, drawing our attention back to him. He was shaking his head slowly, still in denial, still trying to find a way out of the trap that had closed around him completely. This is entrapment, he said weakly, his voice hoarse and broken. You can't do this. Augustus deliberately deceived me, made promises he never intended to keep. That's illegal. That's fraud on his part, Mr. Shaw actually laughed a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. Entrapment? Fraud? Oh, Darius, you really should have paid more attention in those business law classes you supposedly took. He walked back to his briefcase, pulling out yet another document, this one thinner but no less official looking. This, he said, holding it up, is a sworn affidavit from Augustus, recorded 3 months before his death and witnessed by myself, a notary public, and 2 independent witnesses. In it, he clearly states that any verbal promises made to you regarding inheritance were spoken under emotional duress during his illness and hold no legal weight whatsoever. He placed the document on top of the audit report. He also states explicitly that he became aware of your systematic theft and chose not to prosecute immediately for personal reasons relating to his daughter's emotional well-being. He further states that this decision should in no way be construed as forgiveness or acceptance of your criminal behavior. Mr. Shaw leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He documented everything, Darius. Every conversation, every promise, every suspicion. He built a legal fortress around Imani while simultaneously building a prison for you. And you walked into it willingly, eagerly, greedily. Darius's face crumpled completely. The last vestiges of his composure, his dignity, his carefully constructed persona, everything collapsed. He put his face in his hands and began to sob, harsh, ugly sounds that echoed through the elegant room. I worked so hard, he choked out between sobs. I dedicated 10 years. 10 years of my life to this family, to him. I deserve something. I deserve to be recognized, compensated. You were compensated, I said coldly, my voice steady despite the rage burning inside me. You were paid a generous salary as his financial manager. You received bonuses, benefits, health insurance. You had access to resources most people only dream of. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? I walked closer to him, standing over his broken form. You wanted everything. You wanted his house, his money, his art collection, his daughter's inheritance. You wanted to be him, and you were willing to steal, lie, cheat, and betray everyone who trusted you to get it. You didn't work hard for this family, Darius, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. You worked hard to rob this family. Every late night, you claimed to be reviewing accounts. You were actually creating fake invoices. Every weekend you said you were meeting with advisors. You were actually transferring money to offshore accounts. Every moment of concern you showed for my father's health was just you calculating how much longer you had to drain him dry before he died. I crouched down so I was eye level with him, forcing him to look at me. You didn't love me. You never loved me. I was just convenient cover, a useful prop in your long con. And when I became inconvenient, when Brittany offered you a better deal, you discarded me without a second thought. Darius looked up at me, his eyes red and streaming, his face a mask of desperation. Imani, please. We were married. We had something real once, didn't we? Doesn't that count for anything? I stood up, looking down at him with nothing but contempt. No, it doesn't, because it was never real. You were never real. You're a hollow shell filled with greed and ambition, and now you're finally being held accountable. Brittany suddenly found her voice, scrambling to her feet with desperate urgency. Wait just a minute, she shrieked, her voice high and panicked. This has nothing to do with me. I didn't know about any of this. I'm innocent. Mr. Shaw turned his cold gaze on her, one eyebrow raised in sardonic amusement. Oh, Miss Brittany, did you really think we forgot about you? He pulled out another section of the audit, flipping to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. The forensic accountants were quite thorough. They traced several shell corporations directly back to you. DBR Consulting, that's your initials backwards, isn't it? Tiffany Management Solutions, that's your first name. Not exactly creative criminal behavior. Brittany's face went from red to white in seconds. I was just helping Darius with legitimate business ventures. I didn't know the money was. You knew, Mr. Shaw said flatly. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You helped him set up offshore accounts. You signed incorporation papers for fake companies. You accepted wire transfers totaling over $300,000 over the last 18 months. He looked at her with undisguised disgust. You weren't just sleeping with your sister's husband, Miss Brittany. You were his willing accomplice in financial fraud and elder abuse. The district attorney is going to have a field day with you. District attorney? Brittany's voice came out as a squeak. You're going to the police? Oh, we already did, Mr. Shaw said calmly, checking his expensive watch. About an hour ago, right before I arrived here. I sent them a complete copy of this audit, along with Augustus's sworn affidavit and my own testimony as his attorney. They were very interested. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, a clear, melodious chime that echoed through the house. Mr. Shaw smiled, a cold, satisfied expression. And that would be them now. Brittany let out a sound that was somewhere between a scream and a sob. Darius didn't move, didn't react. He just sat there, still as death, staring at nothing. I walked to the front door, my legs feeling stronger with each step. I wasn't a grieving, confused daughter anymore. I was a woman taking back her power, her home, her life. I opened the door to find two detectives in plain clothes, badges visible on their belts, accompanied by two uniformed officers. Miss Devon, the older detective asked, his voice respectful. I'm Detective Morrison. This is Detective Chen. We have warrants for the arrest of Darius Marcus Devon and Brittany and Coleman. They're in the living room, I said, my voice steady and clear. Please, come in. I led them through my father's house, my house now, to the living room where Darius and Brittany remained frozen in their personal hells. Darius Marcus Devon, Detective Morrison said formally, approaching with handcuffs ready. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights seemed to take forever, each word another nail in Darius's coffin. He didn't resist. He didn't protest. He simply stood when they pulled him up, his movements mechanical, robotic. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound of finality. Brittany, in contrast, fought like a cornered cat. She screamed, she cried, she begged. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. Darius forced me. He manipulated me. I'm a victim too. But the female officer was experienced and efficient. Within moments, Brittany was also in handcuffs, still sobbing and protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen, which was no one. As they led both of them toward the door, Darius stopped. He turned to look at me one last time, and for a moment, I saw something almost like the man I thought I'd married, lost, broken, human. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words barely audible. Imani, I cut him off sharply. You don't get to apologize. You don't get absolution or forgiveness. You made your choices, Darius. Every single one of them. And now you get to live with the consequences. He nodded slowly, and then they led him away. Brittany was still screaming about lawyers and lawsuits as they escorted her out, but her voice faded as they walked down the front steps. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click. The house was silent again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, cleansed, purified. Mr. Shaw was gathering his documents carefully, placing everything back into his briefcase with meticulous precision. When he finished, he turned to me with a gentle, almost paternal smile. Your father would be so proud of you, he said quietly. The way you stood up to them. The way you handled yourself. He knew you had that strength in you. He always did. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks, but these were different, not tears of grief or anger, but of release. I wish he was here to see it. Oh, I think he saw it, Mr. Shaw said, looking around the elegant room, at the art on the walls, at the grand piano in the corner, at the books lining the shelves. I think he's been watching over you this whole time, making sure everything went exactly according to plan. He walked to the door, then paused and turned back. There's one more thing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored and elegant, with my name written on it in my father's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. What he wrote this the day after he received the final audit, Mr. Shaw explained. He asked me to give it to you after today. After justice was done, he squeezed my shoulder one last time. Take your time reading it. Lock the door behind me. Make yourself some tea, and read your father's final words to you. You've earned that moment of peace. He left quietly, professionally, leaving me alone in the house that was finally, truly, legally mine. I locked the front door as he'd instructed, then walked through the house, my house turning on lights as I went. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on for tea, using my mother's favorite china pot, the one with the delicate rose pattern. While the water heated, I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of me, my heart pounding. With trembling fingers, I opened it carefully, pulling out several pages of my father's careful, precise handwriting. My dearest Imani, if you're reading this, then it means everything has happened exactly as I planned. Darius has been arrested. The audit has been revealed. The house is yours. Justice has been served. I need you to understand something, my darling girl. I didn't do any of this out of revenge or anger, though God knows I had every right to both. I did this out of love, pure, unconditional fatherly love. When I discovered what Darius was doing, my first instinct was rage. I wanted to destroy him immediately, publicly, completely. But then I looked at you, my precious daughter, who was already carrying so much grief, knowing I was dying. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't break your heart twice. So I built this trap. I built it carefully, meticulously, knowing that men like Darius are always, ultimately destroyed by their own greed. I knew he would come for the house. I knew he wouldn't be able to help himself. And I knew that when he did, you would finally see him clearly for what he truly was. The house was never just a house to me. Imani, it was your mother's dream. Our life together, your childhood, your future. I bought it the day you were born because I wanted you to always have a home, a foundation, something solid and permanent in an uncertain world. When your mother died, I thought about selling it. The memories were too painful, but I kept it for you. And 10 years ago, when I saw who Darius really was, I knew I had to protect it from him. Hence the trust, everything I have built, everything I have earned, everything I have saved. It's all yours now. Not because you're my blood, though you are, and I'm endlessly proud of that, but because you're kind, you're strong, you're genuine, and you deserve every good thing this world has to offer. Don't let this experience make you cynical or closed off, my darling. Yes, Darius betrayed you terribly, but that's his failure, not yours. You loved openly and honestly, and that's never something to be ashamed of. The ability to trust and love is a strength, not a weakness. Move forward. Live in this house or sell it, whatever brings you peace. Use the money to travel, to study, to start a business, to help others. Build a life that makes you happy. Find love again when you're ready, the real kind that you deserve, and know that every single day, in whatever comes next, I am with you. In the books on these shelves that we read together, in the garden outside where you learned to plant tomatoes, in the art on these walls that we chose together, in every room of this house that holds our memories, you are my greatest achievement, Imani. Not the business, not the money, not the success. You, my daughter, my pride and joy. Be happy, my darling girl. That's all I ever wanted for you. All my love, always and forever. Daddy read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking and healing simultaneously. He had thought of everything. Even in his final days, racked with pain and knowing he was dying, he had thought of me first, planned for my future, protected me with the fierce devotion only a parent can have. The kettle whistled, breaking through my tears. I made my tea Earl Grey with honey, just the way Daddy had taught me, and sat at the table for a long time, his letter in my hands, feeling his presence all around me. Outside, the sun was setting over Inman Park, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the kitchen window, I could see my father's garden, the tomatoes he'd planted in his final spring, now heavy with fruit. Tomorrow, I would call the locksmith and change every lock in the house. Tomorrow, I would call my father's accountant and begin the process of claiming my full inheritance. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding my life from the ashes of my marriage. But tonight, I would sit in my father's house, my house, and simply breathe. I would honor his memory, not with tears and grief, but with gratitude and strength. I was Imani Devon. I was Augustus's daughter. And I was finally home. The house settled around me with comforting creaks and sighs, and for the first time in a year, I felt at peace. Justice had been served. My father's love had triumphed over greed, and I was free.